Siona God, hello all. Oshisahi, good evening and Wado, thank you for watching. So this is day 22, part B of reading, whoopsies, sorry, Black Rednecks and White Liberals by Thomas Sowell. Sorry if you get motion sick. There we go, we're gonna let that stand. And hopefully we can finish it. Japan went from being a backward feudal society to becoming a modern industrial nation by learning from Europeans and Americans, both by sending their students to study in Europe and the United States, and by bringing Europeans and Americans to Japan to teach the needed skills or to provide the industrial experience required to launch Japanese industries. And here's something else that I was going to mention, but I didn't have time at the last part, about like role models and stuff, and like how people pipe up and say that they're involved in all that, but they literally have no skin in the game. Right? It could be a celebrity or what have you. And they are so far removed from the situation. But you have to think about it. When you see them in protest and they're getting arrested, like Jane Fonda or whatever, right? Anybody, name somebody. Those people don't suffer the consequences for having a criminal record. I'm just saying. They literally don't. And a lot of times their stuff gets pardoned because they're like, that's just Jane being Jane, right? Or whatever. But if they don't, they literally will not miss any work. They won't stop filming and all this. They won't stop doing interviews, making songs, whatever it is they do, just because they got arrested for like not cooperating, just sitting there on their hands when the popo tells them to get up because they don't have a permit to protest, right? Or they're clearing everything out. Okay, everybody, it's time to go. And they're like, I'm sitting here for the clicks, the likes, the views, the whatever it is, the 5 minutes of TV, TMZ is going to come, whatever it is. But you, during that moment, when you're leading with your feelings instead of logic, I don't care what your stance is on anything. If you are breaking the law, you're going to suffer the consequences, and good luck finding gainful employment when that hits your record, right? Good luck keeping your job when that hits your record. Your boss gets wind or sees you on the TV being arrested, don't bother coming into work. That's what they're going to tell you. Or they're going to fire you on site, and then they're going to take all your whatever it is, your badges, your clearance, whatever. Do you understand what I'm telling you? And they're not going to give you a recommendation. So just in one stupid social media post, or I guess stupid is a low frequency word. So just in one knee-jerk reaction social media post, or one knee-jerk reaction comment to somebody and you don't even know who the heck they are, or you do and then they go say something about you, or one something and then you have a run-in with a popo, or like whatever it is, can literally cost you everything. Okay? So just quit doing it. Quit taking the bait. Okay? And if you have like anger issues or racial issues or whatever it is, seek therapy from a therapist that does not look like you, that doesn't believe the way that you believe, okay? Because they will only be able to show you things from a logical perspective and not interject their yeah man mentality. Yeah, I know you feel like this, but you gotta keep it to yourself. Like you gotta, and then find other ways to stick it to the man. And so like, no, you need somebody who's going to bring you out of your shell and talk some sense into you logically, right? And respectfully. Anyways, moving on. Want to make sure I'm at the right spot. In the United States, the immigrant generation of Jewish children in the late 19th century and early 20th century, New York City, were taught largely by Irish Catholic teachers, while the generation of Black children arriving in Harlem in the 1930s and 40s were far more often taught by Jewish teachers than by Black teachers. In both cases, these were the generations that rose into positions that their parents had seldom achieved. The second generation of Japanese American children likewise rose to positions that their parents, overwhelmingly farmers, had never achieved. Moreover, Japanese American youngsters of that generation were unlikely ever to have had a Japanese American teacher or to have seen a Japanese American working in any professional or scientific field, even though these became fields in which Japanese Americans later excelled. The notion of quote-unquote role models is not merely false, but pernicious, P-E-R-N-I-C-I-O-U-S, when it becomes part of the straitjacket of groupthink. Lessons of history. History whose integrity has not been compromised by contemporary agendas is not, quote unquote, irrelevant to our times. On the contrary, it can often be of great value, not only in correcting factual errors, but also in dispelling feelings and attitudes that needlessly encumber our lives today. For example, Shelby Steele, Shelby Steele, has aptly pointed out that much that is said and done today that makes no sense in itself is a result of a desperate desire of whites to avoid being considered racists and a desperate desire of blacks to avoid being considered inferior. Exactly. For blacks, there is also a desire to escape the stigma of being a race which shamefully submitted to the degradation of slavery. Honest history deflates such distractions from the task of dealing with today's problems today. While racism has sometimes been a major factor in history, it has often been a result of slavery, for example, instead of an autonomous case. And in any event, its waxing and waning in the history of white reactions to Black Americans shows that its effects are neither immutable nor inevitable. It is futile for people who are not racist to try endlessly to prove a negative, nor should people who are in fact racist be exempt from the charge because of verbal sleight of hand, such as adding a proviso, Proviso, of quote unquote power to the definition. It is equally futile and equally unnecessary for blacks to try to prove a negative that they are not genetically inferior or not less manly than other races in having submitted to slavery. The notion that blacks were unusual in submitting to slavery is one that cannot survive any serious study of the history of slavery around the world. Every race was enslaved, and few were in any position to revolt, much less to succeed in their uprisings. Slavery could not have lasted for thousands of years around the world if it could be readily overthrown by rebellion. The most famous slave revolt, that of Spartacus in ancient Rome, ended in devastating defeat of the slaves and mass agonizing deaths publicly inflicted on them. Neither Europeans, Asians, or Africans escaped the fate of being slaves or the guilt of being enslavers. Only in unusual circumstances where the slave population greatly outnumbered the enslaving race, for example, where were slave uprisings likely to succeed, even locally, or communities of escaped slaves likely to survive, as among blacks in some Caribbean islands, however you want to pronounce that. One of the painful consequences of a history constrained by contemporary agendas and contemporary attitudes has been a taboo against researching and discussing the history of IQ and other mental test results among various groups. The social taboo has in recent times been backed up by legal restrictions on giving IQ tests to black school children, and in too many cases by campus disruptions and violence against speakers attempting to discuss research and conclusions on the subject that others disagree with. But only research and analysis by those who have defied the taboos has brought out the fact that people of a variety of ancestries and countries around the world have had average IQ scores at the same level as that of blacks in the United States. In India, for example, mental test score differences among various groups are even greater than those between black and white Americans. Only historical research has brought out regional differences in mental test results that cut across racial lines, so that white soldiers in various southern states scored lower on mental tests than black soldiers from various northern states during the First World War. Only historical research has brought out the fact that black children attending Dunbar High School in Washington consistently equaled or exceeded that national average on IQ tests for decades, even though they were a substantial proportion of all black high school students in the city and were not pre-selected for admission by mental tests. Indeed, there were some students at Dunbar with subnormal IQs, but they were offset by others whose IQs considerably exceeded the national average. The weightiest evidence of all has been the historical research of James R. Flynn, Flynn, showing what has been called, in quotes, the Flynn effect, end quote, that contrary to both the logic and the predictions of believers in genetic determination of IQs, national performances on IQ tests have risen substantially over the years in more than a dozen countries, with black Americans at the end of the 20th century answering as many IQ test questions correctly as whites answered in the middle of that century. This does not change the racial gap, but it undermines genetic determinism as an explanation for that gap. Exactly. None of this would have been known if the taboo on IQ research had not been defied. And much of this research would not have been done without the previous research of those who concluded that IQ differences were largely due to genetic differences. In other areas as well, history shows that initially mistaken beliefs have provided the impetus for study and research which advanced human understanding beyond where it was before the mistaken beliefs arose. Chemistry, for example, developed out of discredited alchemy, and astronomy out of astrology. In an age of clashing civilizations, and hold on a minute, chemistry, for example, developed out of discredited alchemy, and astronomy out of astrology. Okay. Huh. Discredited alchemy. I never heard that before. I didn't know that, like, that's how that came to be. Anyway, I'm gonna have to look into that. In an age of clashing civilizations and of hatreds so fierce as to provoke suicide terrorism. Christopher, have you heard of this? Chemistry, for example, developed out of discredited alchemy. I've never heard of that. In an age of clashing civilizations and of hatred so fierce as to provoke suicide terrorism, history is both a treasure chest of experience and a powder keg. As Edmund Burke, B-U-R-K-E, aptly put it more than 2 centuries ago, in history, a great volume is unrolled for our instruction, drawing the materials of future wisdom from the past errors and infirmities of mankind. It may, in the perversion, serve for a magazine furnishing offensive and defensive weapons, and supplying the means of keeping alive or reviving dissensions and animosities and adding fuel to civil fury. While the lessons of history can be valuable, the twisting of history and the mining of the past for grievances can tear a society apart. Past grievances, real and imaginary, are equally irremediable. irremediable in the present, for nothing that is done among living contemporaries can change in the slightest the sins and the sufferings of generations who took those sins and sufferings to the grave with them in centuries past. Galling, Galling, as it may be, to be helpless to redress the crying injustices of the past. I'm going to tell you, I feel like he's putting in like other words at the end. I literally have like, now I have almost 1 3/4 pages left probably. And I'm like, woof, stumbling, bumbling. All right, let's see. Crying injustices of the past, symbolic expiation, expiation, in the present can only create new injustices among the living and new problems for the future. When newborn babies enter the world with prepackaged grievances against other babies born the same day, both have their futures jeopardized, not only by their internal strife, but also by the increased vulnerability of a disunited society to external dangers from other nations and from international terrorist networks. To be relevant to our times, history must not be controlled by our times. Its integrity as a record of the past is what allows us to draw lessons from it. One of the most chilling lessons of the history of the 20th century is how deceptive domestic tranquility can be in a multi-ethnic society when it takes only the right circumstances and the right demagogue to turn neighbor murderously against neighbor. It's true. There was not a single race riot between Sinhalese, Sinhalese majority, and the Tamil, Tamil minority in Sri Lanka during the first half of the 20th century, and the relations between the two groups at mid-century were regarded by many observers as a model for how different ethnic groups could exist in harmony. Yet the second half of the century saw not only massive and lethal riots between these two groups, but also unspeakable atrocities inflicted on individuals from one group who just happened to fall into the hands of the other group. Moreover, all this fermented hatred and violence escalated into a full-scale civil war in which a small country suffered more deaths than the United States suffered during all the long years of Vietnam War. Both quote-unquote sides lost. And they lost because they became sides instead of remaining fellow countrymen with different cultures. Oh, yeah. Sri Lanka was not unique. Neighbors who had lived in peace for years or even generations turned on one another murderously in Indonesia, in the Balkans, and in sub-Saharan Africa, as ethnic polarization and strife were stirred up by either fanatics or opportunists. In Germany, in the 1920s, Jews were so widely accepted socially that nearly half of all Jewish marriages in Germany during that decade were marriages with non-Jews. But that did not prevent the Holocaust, right? While history is an explicit legacy of the past, cultural patterns and traditions are inarticulate, its inarticulate legacy and the differential survival of varying practices. Many who seek to subordinate history to current visions and agendas likely seek to replace this cultural legacy. Man, I'm hoping I can finish in this one. Those who regard the accumulated experiences of successive generations distilled in social traditions as mere quote-unquote constructions on the same plane as alternative quote-unquote constructions that they excogitate, I don't know how to say that, are ignoring the consequential processes through which those traditions have been filtered and from which they have emerged. The viability of these traditions is attested to by the mere fact that they are still here to be criticized, while the viability of alternative quote-unquote constructions has yet to be proved, and they may be able to survive only in the minds of those who put them together. Notions and knowledge are different precisely because the former have not passed through the verification process, while the latter has. Although the misunderstanding of the past cannot affect the past, it can affect the future, sometimes catastrophically. Yeah. Human beings have survived too many mistakes and misjudgments to make mere inaccuracy fatal by itself. Yet the fact that nations and whole civilizations have also collapsed with tragic repercussions lasting for centuries is a sobering reminder that there is not an unlimited latitude for error or misconception. Sealing ourselves off from reality within a vision risks the kind of catastrophes that blind rulers have brought down upon themselves and their countries from the days of the Roman Empire to the cataclysm into which Hitler led Germany. The key factor in these calamities has often been a blocking of feedback from reality, epitomized by the figurative or literal killing of messengers bringing bad news, where beliefs are not checked against facts, but instead facts must meet the test of consonance with the prevailing vision. We are in the process of sealing ourselves off from feedback from reality. That's true. Heedless of the past, we are flying blind into the future. And that's it. Done to go, Till we meet again on the next book. Love you, mean it.